The Miami Dolphins took another tough hit this Sunday when they went up against the Seattle Seahawks at Lumen Field. It wasn't just a bad day, it was a significant setback. Coming off a 31-10 loss against the Buffalo Bills, you'd think this team would be desperate to bounce back. But instead, the Dolphins fell further, losing 24-3 in a game that didn't feel close at any point. Let's break down the key storylines going into the game and how they unfolded. Going into the game, all eyes were on Skylar Thompson. The Dolphins stuck with him despite some shaky performances in training camp and preseason. But hey, that's what head coach Mike McDaniel is paid for, right? Trusting his players to step up when the moment calls. Well, this was supposed to be Thompson's moment to shine, especially after that last-minute playoff loss in Buffalo. But from the very start, you could tell something was off. Right after his initial 22-yard completion to Devon Achane, Thompson never looked comfortable. He finished with 13 completions on 19 attempts for just 107 yards. He was sacked 5 times, struggled with decision-making, and by the time he left the game with a chest injury, it was clear the Dolphins were still far from solving their quarterback issues. It was a rough outing, no two ways about it. And it raises a bigger question: how confident can the team really feel about Skylar Thompson leading this offense if they have to keep turning to him? One of the biggest concerns coming into this matchup was whether Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle could bounce back after being virtually erased by the Buffalo defense. The duo had combined for only 65 yards in that game, their worst showing since they became teammates. Fans were hopeful that Seattle wouldn't be able to shut them down in the same way. Unfortunately, the results weren't much better. This time around, Hill and Waddle combined for just 66 yards. Hill got 40 of them, while Waddle managed only 26. Some of this can be chalked up to how the Seahawks defended them, but there's no getting around the fact that the offense wasn't clicking. Whether it was Thompson not finding his rhythm or the offensive line failing to hold up, the Dolphins' passing game never got going. If Hill and Waddle aren't the focal point of this offense, it's going to be tough for Miami to stay competitive, and that was painfully clear on Sunday. On the defensive side, Anthony Weaver, the Dolphins' defensive coordinator, faced off against a familiar face in Seattle's head coach Mike Macdonald. Weaver's defense was expected to be a key factor if the Dolphins were to have any hope of pulling off an upset. After all, this defense had talked a lot in the offseason about playing with a new aggressive, bullying mentality. But what we saw didn't quite live up to the hype. The Seahawks came out strong, putting up 17 points and racking up 151 yards in the first quarter alone. That kind of start makes it incredibly tough to win games. To their credit, the Dolphins' defense did settle in during the second half, keeping the game within reach by limiting Seattle to just one more score. But by then, the damage was done, and there wasn't much the defense could do to pull off a miraculous comeback. In the trenches, it was clear that the battle between the offensive lines would play a huge role in the outcome. For Miami, Aaron Brewer stepped in at center, while Seattle featured Connor Williams, a former Dolphins player. Williams had left Miami as a free agent after suffering a serious knee injury last season. While the stat sheet might suggest Williams got the better of Brewer, it's worth noting that Pro Football Focus gave Brewer a higher grade for the game. However, Williams did make a couple of costly mistakes, committing 2 penalties on a single drive, one for holding, another for a false start. Still, when the Seahawks needed to close things out, their offensive line delivered, especially on that final drive where Zach Charbonnet picked up 42 of his 91 rushing yards. One bright spot for the Dolphins has been running back Devon Achane. Coming off a huge game against Buffalo where he had 29 touches and over 150 yards from scrimmage, fans were eager to see if he could keep that momentum going. With Raheem Mostert still likely out, Achane was expected to carry a heavy workload. But the Dolphins couldn't get him going either. His touches dropped from 29 to 14, and he only managed 58 yards. The lack of big plays from him definitely contributed to Miami's struggles on offense. Achane is clearly becoming the Dolphins' go-to guy at running back, but on a day when the whole offense was out of sync, even his best efforts weren't enough to make a difference.